Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. Blizzard is launching a all-out war against add-ons that will be arriving at some point in the near future, not tomorrow or next week or even by the patch 11.2 or anything like that, but at some point the game is going to go through a massive shift. WoW players have been used to add-ons for a very long time, and many of add-ons that add accessibility or even some of the unique features to the game that improve on the base experience are going to be kept in the game. However, performance-based add-ons like details or boss mods or even weak cores to some degree are going to be scaled back. A lot of those functionalities that are necessary for the game are going to remain to baseline features like an in-game damage meter for once, or changes to nameplates that copy some of the designs and ideas from nameplate add-ons and such. However, the game is also going to go through a pretty drastic shift to try to create an environment where the game is going to be less reliant on add-ons going forward. Recently, Blizzard put up an article going over a little bit more detail regarding what they plan to do with add-ons, specifically targeting more detail to let both the community as well as the dev managers that create these add-ons for the game be a little bit more in the loop as to what they're trying to do with it in the future. And the changes they're looking to make to the game, in my opinion, could actually be massive and a game changer for hopefully better design going forward into future expansions. Also, they address some concerns that people had with some of the favorite accessibility add-ons, as those are most likely not going to be going anywhere whatsoever. And I wanted to cover all these add-on changes that will be arriving at some point in the future. As always, if you guys want to keep up with the regular updates for the War Within expansion or even the future expansions for the World Soul Saga, since likely these changes will be maybe appearing by midnight or even later, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive right in. So as part of this post, they actually clear up a lot of the confusion, which I think a lot of you guys are going to be happy to hear. The first thing they want to do is to make sure that this update is not only aimed at the community, but also at some of the devs that work on these add-ons, to make sure that players as well as the community that makes add-ons are aware of when these changes to add-on restrictions are arriving. And they'll be announced apparently at some time in the future, way ahead of schedule, so everybody is aware and has ample time to prepare for this add-on adjustment. Right now, there isn't a specific date for this change, as the game must go through a number of changes first before any add-ons become restricted, which is probably the best step of going forward. You need to change boss mechanics as well as the future designer mechanics. Class design also needs to be adjusted and more streamlined than anything, but also the complexity of encounters needs to be reevaluated and in some cases toned down before you can disable any of the add-ons. You basically got to get the game in a state where add-ons are necessary, and then you can set up a restriction on top of it where they're basically just not needed for you to be able to get the clarity of what your class is supposed to do, what you're supposed to do inside of an encounter. The aim is also to minimize the impact on accessibility add-ons as much as possible, and that is one thing that a lot in the community were worried about, as there's so many cool add-ons that WoW adds that are not necessarily there to enhance your gameplay or increase your performance with an endgame, but give you so much more information regarding the world, give you so much more immersion, or even can change the way that you can interact with the game, especially if you don't play on mouse and keyboard. And for many players that need those accessibility features, that is something they also want to talk about. Like when they initially said that all add-ons are going to be banned or restricted, a lot of players were really worried about, especially those of you that were play the game using a controller or some sort of control-like system in order to be able to experience the game in the open world itself. There's a lot of people that need that stuff for accessibility. It just allows them to enjoy the game in a much better state. So in those situations, they're looking to minimize the impact of anything that doesn't deal with endgame progression, playing your character better, performance improvements within high-end content. Everything else should be either left alone as is, or they'll find a way to integrate it into the base game. Controller support is another great example here. Controller support for WoW technically natively does exist, but add-ons that allow you for advanced controller support are much better than Blizzard's base UI. So that is one of those features that will likely be integrated from the add-on into the base game directly. And some of the primary goals, at least when it comes to replacing certain add-ons or restricting some, is focus on creating a built-in damage meter, improved the nameplate's functionality in a variety of different ways, as well as a good portion of when it comes to combat information through weak auras or icons or flashes or anything like that, just to give players more information or even just improve generally on cooldown manager. Like, it's a really good feature all on its own, but it just doesn't quite do everything that weak auras can do. You can't customize it in terms of what buffs you want to track, what essential cooldowns you want to look at. Like, as an outlaw rogue, why do I need to know that a Sinister Strike or pistol shots are available? You know what I mean? I would like to know, let's say, if like I get opportunity procs, because those could stack up to, like, with Fan the Hammer, up to 6 of them. I'd like to know when my next pistol shot is going to generate more comp points than it normally would. But I don't really need to see my pistol shot up at all times or anything like that. And those are the little things that they can easily improve upon. And there's so many different weak auras and weak aura packages that players use that can help them at least define the cooldown manager in a much clearer way. Combined together with some of the class changes they're looking into, which we'll talk about in a little bit, they're looking to add all those baseline features as part of the base game before they're looking to disable any add-ons in the near future. As part of this post, they also talked about the changes to difficulty when it comes to endgame content. Raids would be a pretty good example of it, but Mythic Plus, Delves, and I imagine certain open world challenges, as well as maybe certain challenging pieces of content, like things like Mage Tower challenges, or maybe even horrific missions to some degree. All of those are going to go through a various amounts of changes before add-ons can be made restricted. Mythic rating, for instance, is very reliant right now on add-ons and weak auras, some more necessarily than others, while some may just be a convenience of sorts in order to help you optimize your gameplay a little bit better. A great example would be of an add-on necessity would be Ovinax. Everybody brings them up pretty regularly, but Ovinax is a mechanic where you gotta run to these eggs and it auto-assigns you which eggs you gotta run to, and being able to do that in, let's say, a Discord call is very difficult because it gives you only a few seconds to figure out who got to be assigned. You could say, Billy, go stack in circle. Johnny, go stack in diamond. And then by then you'll still need 2 more people to be assigned where they got to go, and then the mechanic goes off. So there's nothing in game right now that auto assigns you or tells you exactly where you gotta be or helps you out in any way. There's no leeway in timer to figure out who's gotta go where. You just have a very split-second ability, a weaker that helps assign you exactly where you gotta go so that you don't make that mistake that could then wipe your entire raid, giving you literally 2-3 seconds in order to make a quick second decision. Otherwise, you gotta pull the boss again. Things like that are just not great, and that's an example of a mechanic that requires an add-on. Like, when doing the fight without a weak aura, hell, even if you're just trying to pug it without a Discord call, it's nearly impossible. There's just no time whatsoever because the mechanic is there and it feels kind of complex for the sake of complexity. Complex mechanics require complex add-ons, but it creates a loop of Blizzard makes a difficult mechanic, players create an add-on in order to solve it. Blizzard takes note of it, and it's like, okay, well, that mechanic is now easy and trivialized, so let's make even a more complex mechanic, and then players make an add-on out of necessity to solve that mechanic. And then you just make a harder mechanic that's there for the sake of complexity, and then you create an equally complex add-on or weak aura in order to be able to solve it, and it just goes on and on and on and on. That makes things impossible for the average player that's just trying to break into Mythic rating for the first time, or let alone if any of those mechanics bleed into heroics or even normal, like you're just making those add-ons and weak auras a necessity. So what they want to do with this whole change is to level the playing field, make the game's mechanics more approachable at all interval levels, easier to understand. Like, if you get assigned, the game should obviously assign you things, where you gotta go, where you gotta be, if there's some sort of a strict assignment that is involved in a fight maybe. Make a lot of the mechanics easier to understand, but also easier to execute. Not complex for the sake of complexity. And like, a lot of classic players will note this. Like, if you're playing in Kata Classic, or even just Anniversary WoW, or SOD, or Hardcore servers, you'll notice that the game over time, like some of the older raids and older fights, maybe not the most complex, but very straightforward, but there's a clear mechanic that you must execute. They're not complicated for the sake of complex, like a math equation that you gotta solve while on a fly. That's what retail feels like to a lot of players. One of the things I want to do for that too is to remove a lot of the unnecessary fluff, like a billion swirlies that you gotta dodge constantly, so you can't ever stand still on your mage or shadow priest to get some damage out. But those things will also come in at the cost of restricting add-ons to solve the fights. So first, you gotta make the mechanics that can be solved without add-ons, without weak auras, that a team can actually coordinate together fairly reliably in order to be able to defeat the boss. And then once you achieve that goal and that type of a rating scene, remove the add-ons afterwards. That is the whole goal with this whole system, is to create the environment where add-ons are necessary and then restrict the add-ons afterwards, which is a lot better than having to yank all of those tools out of players' hands and then try to find a way to simplify these mechanics afterwards. That would have just been the worst kind of way of going about it. And another part, which I'm super excited about, is the fact that class changes are also going to be coming forward with this add-on restriction. Not only are they going to have to change the environment of the raids and dungeons that we play through, but also the classes are also going to need to be made a little bit easier as well, or a little bit more streamlined. And off the top of your head, there's a good chance that you probably can name a handful of specs and classes that you would recommend for a brand new player that are pretty easy to pick up and pretty easy to start doing well at endgame, that are not overly complex or require like a full week or a package just to be able to track and even play, somewhat optimally. Specs like Beastmaster Hunter usually pop up for a lot of people's heads. I would say Frost Death Knight, every button glows, you press it. Red Paladin is generally pretty approachable. Destro Warlock's also pretty manageable. Fury Warriors, who doesn't love a good Fury Warrior, but some classes are a lot more approachable than others. And they actually wanted to point to a handful of specs in the game that are not quite so, that could definitely be streamlined. Outlaw Rogue was actually one of those specs that was pointed out by Ian Hazzikostas himself more than once now, that probably is a little bit overly engineered. Like, it's just way too many things happening at once. Not only do you have the complexity of the Roll the Bones mechanic, which provides you with a variety of different buffs, an assortment of them, from comp point builders to proc buffs, and some of them can actually change rotation in a variety of different ways. But then you have abilities like Adrenaline Rush, which you would think, oh wow, 3-minute cooldown, I guess I'll just use it once every 3 minutes. Nope, you got a mechanic called Underhanded Upper Hand. While you're on stealth, you actually get to prolong the duration of Adrenaline Rush almost infinitely. So then now you have to use your double vanishes and those cooldown reduction that's baked into the spec to get vanish back down on shorter cooldown. Use it as much as you want to. On top of it, you have comp point building and spending that changes wildly, whether you're playing the ambush build or if you're playing the keep it rolling build, and the priority of which abilities you should be using for your comp point builders and spenders changes depending on the buffs that you have. And by this point, there's a good chance that I just lost some of you, and I'm just gonna stop this right here. Trust me, as somebody who's been playing Rogue and loves this class, I did notice that it became a lot more complex. All three specs in particular have so many more mechanics that most classes just wouldn't have. There's so many resources for you to manage, so many little cooldowns for you to juggle, specific uses for all of these things. And as somebody who loves playing this class, making guides on it I found to be one of the hardest things ever, and I've been doing this for multiple expansions now, and something's gotta change, and streamlining is something that I'm actually super excited for. Outside of Outlaw Rogue, a lot of players point to Feral Druids, which historically have been very punishing to play. Like, if you can play it optimally, it does great damage, but if you make a mistake or two, your damage can quickly plummet for the rest of the encounter. Windwalker Monk is another one that doesn't see a lot of popularity. I would even say, to some degree, maybe not current version of Elemental Shaman, but generally Elemental Shaman in the past, with some of the complicated combos of elements that it had, that one could also be a little bit harder for newer people to pick up. Survival Hunter still sees very little play. Affliction Warlock sees unfortunately low play. Shadow Priest is another one that I'll put in that list in terms of complexity. So those are all the specs that maybe could be streamed down a little bit. Like, still keep their own type of like unique mechanic or unique hook that they play into, but the actual gameplay, the procs, and all of these different things could probably be made a little bit easier that a new player can pick up and not be completely bottom of the barrel DPS doing less damage than a tank or even healers in some cases, if you aren't able to keep up with every single one of the procs. Essentially what they said towards the tail end of the post is they don't want the game to be a type of an experience where players have to wrestle with class mechanics, as those should be made a little bit more streamlined. Where the difficulty and the challenge of WoW, at least as they see it right now, should come from is from your ability to deal with the mechanics and the environment, which needs to be communicated with the players with utmost clarity. So they're looking at the difficulty which should come from the actual content and the environment, rather than from the minutia of the little things that you need to do with your class, which I think at least one of these things gotta give. Either the mechanics need to be simplified and the difficulty must come from just how challenging it is to play your class, or the opposite, classes need to be made a little bit more streamlined, but the difficulty will then come from the actual end game progression, the end game fights, the mechanical challenges of an encounter, but you can only balance the game, in my opinion, in only one way. So for now, that is their direction of what they want to do when it comes to add-ons and everything regarding the class changes. In fact, personally, I'm very excited to see what class changes we'll see in the future. I am wondering if that's something we'll see in a patch 11.2, or if that's something we'll see closer to like midnight or like halfway through midnight. It does seem like a pretty big task, but hopefully we'll see these changes earlier than later. I am actually super excited about some of the changes they're looking for streamlining, especially when they're promising to keep the uniqueness of every single class while just removing some of the more bogged down mechanics, which I think just about every class has a little bit of fat that could be cut out of their base gameplay. And I'm super excited to see exactly what they will do with it, and I'd love to make an update video as soon as we have more class change information for the future. But with that, as always, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching, and hope you guys did enjoy the video. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give it a like. It would very much appreciate it. Also, join this community, especially if you want to keep up with any future updates like the patch 11.17 or any of the 11.2 class change content that we'll hopefully be seeing at some time in the near future. As always, let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.